going to give you a short talk. Firstly, just some comments on the previous people, which is mostly it. So the first speaker, regarding unemployment, I myself have had a program since 1997, an idea called guaranteed minimum income, which is very similar to some American ideas, whereby the thing is, there's a big elephant in the room, and it's assemblers. At the moment there's no progress on it, but it may be due to lack of money because of politics. I strongly suspect so. If it does turn out that assemblers are an avenue of promise, as Drexler pointed out back in 1986, then that does mean that Drexler himself initially theorised there'd be a 6-month to 1 year period in which assemblers become very prevalent, general universal assemblers. They're not really universal, but capable of making robots or computers or things like that. And in that period, companies who had control of the technology would become extremely powerful politically. And my solution to that issue is a kind of version of some 19th century ideas whereby you have a thing called a guaranteed minimum income that's paid for by 50% tax on assembly technology. And that tax is distributed directly to all citizens and not through government. So if there's a bonanza in nanotechnology with assemblers, then part of the benefit gets taxed from the companies and distributed equally to everyone, so that the wealth flows through to the bottom levels of society. And in regards to the second, Hugo, the second speaker, for about the same period of time, since 97, I've been arguing that in the UN we should have 2 seats, one appointed by the government and one elected by the country. And that would introduce a notion of an EU-style parliament, where some kind of even if it's just Australia, even if we ourselves just say, well, we have some system in place, some compromise system whereby there's some input from the general population that's separate to the government. So we create a ground force, but obviously many countries that are non-democratic are going to resist such a thing, but we can do it for our own representatives. We've got sway over that. So that's an avenue. And secondly, in regard to what Hugo was saying, I think he's underestimating the potential abilities of translation mechanisms in terms of language. To some extent, if you've got a great translation machine, it's not going to be relevant whether you're speaking Chinese, Mandarin, Cantonese, English, Urdu, Hindu, whatever. It'll be translatable fairly easily, and we're seeing that already in Iraq with preliminary devices. And also, I would say in regard to James, that there were some unusual studies to do with automation in the 1990s by the Extropian community, in which they pointed out a number of, I thought, very freaky facts. For example, if you just had society sitting on 1972 technology, you could actually completely transform the entire solar system within 10,000 years, just using 1970s technology, which is astonishing. Astonishing. But you could, it takes much longer, but you can do it. And also there's been other studies that have shown that even automation by itself, without high-level computerization, will actually make most people unemployed, inverted commas, after a period of even 20 or 30 years. Now these studies may be inaccurate, but people put a lot of effort into it, so that's all very interesting. Now, as far as my main topic goes, I was actually having a reaction to something that Adam was talking about, who is, I think, should actually deserve a round of applause for his efforts wherever he is. There he is. Thank you, as he's the main guy. But yes, I just raised some issues, and I don't really want to read it aloud. And unfortunately, I only printed 15 copies, and there's like 4 people extra here, so someone's going to miss out. But I'll give a couple around, and then I might head off. And if anyone wants a copy, I'm sure Adam can give you my email. victimisation here. Apologies for not continuing talking. It's just that I've been a bit sick with bronchitis, so I feel the urge to rest too much. Thank you very much.
What about having a table at the local church state?
What's that?
How about a singularity table at the local church space? Or maybe at the next, what are they, Planet Shakers conference or something? Would that be a...
Hey, no, there's no harm in sending out an email to... Send an email to... I mean, I don't think the Catholics are really happy. Send one to the Catholics, one to the Anglicans. I don't know, what's the harm in it? Emails are cheap.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we were just trying to find a good place to interview Hugo and get some nice atmosphere, and we stumbled upon the church just next door to our house, and we found a guy there who'd studied at MIT under Norbert Weiner, you know, Mr. Cybernetics, who later on became a Catholic priest. And so I videoed Hugo, and it was an interesting discussion that they had. And I'm not against people choosing religion if they want to choose that, but I think it's I'm not against people choosing not to believe or choosing atheism if that's what they want to choose. I think these ideas should be presented to, I guess, a lot of the various sort of flavours of philosophies out there, and then they can make their own minds up about it.
And certainly in the 1990s, there was quite a plethora of subcultural input into the idea of the philosophies of the singularity. I mean, there were a lot of pagans. There were a lot of like techno-cyberneticists, kind of anarchist people, and so forth, with their own existential points of view and so forth. And it was very productive. But maybe in a sense, time or age has kind of weaned them away a little bit, and now there's a fresh wave coming in as events themselves actually occur.
Well, usually for me, I think these ideas at events that are very mainstream materialistic, that's you know, the mainstream materialism, I think it fits in well. I just find it hard to sort of place, you know, the advance of technology and the belief in mainstream materialism. I think a lot of these ideas around transhumanism and the singularity are based in the mainstream materialism ethos.
And certainly the artistic community itself has withdrawn from it somewhat. I mean, they were heavily involved in the early stages, and now it's been much more so-so. I mean, there is some, but there's nothing. In the early days, maybe a third of the people talking about things were artists and interpreters in the cultural sense. So it's an interesting phenomenon.
Stellart's going to be presenting at the Singularity Salon.
I'll be there.
Any comments, questions on who's will line up and who not to?
You need our own political party?
Does the sex party go have a table at the atheist convention? The which? Sex, atheism? Is that purely atheist party?
What's the sex party?
The sex party.
Oh, the sex party. I misheard you. From Costa Rica.
I'll just finish so that anybody who was distracted by the background, apart from the first lot, there were a whole lot of cellular automata movies that I happen to have made. The last one that's just finished is actually on YouTube with a vaguely audible soundtrack, and it was relevant to some discussions we were having earlier, but it's actually called Rant Against Determinism, and it's basically my visual evidence that determinism's a load of nonsense, at least in the sense of predeterminism, because you cannot possibly do what was just shown on that film without, you can't have been somewhere 5 minutes before it and say that's exactly how it would work out. It has to happen. And that's the point, is the soundtrack, it's my commentary that I tried to make over it, because it was a one-shot take of the 9 minutes. You can't really hear my voice, you can just hear it above the waves, but you can't really work out what my argument is. So, anyway, but I thought it was appropriate because we were having discussions about determinism, but to me, going to the beach and watching waves is the best argument against determinism, for those who still want to be deterministic.
I don't want to be, I just am,
That's
how it was.
Well, we're working. You're not the only one. You're not the only one we're working on. But the other one's not here.
Not that I disagree, but don't you feel that if you had, I guess, computing power big enough, you could fully understand the entire wave?
Short answer: no. Yeah, I do work in that area. Philosophical position. Anyway. The idea that it's possible to know how things turn out without them actually happening makes no sense at so many levels. It doesn't matter. We are making the future, and to whatever degree these things in our heads are any use, and that's yet to be proven. They will determine whatever future there is, but we don't know how they'll determine it. We don't know what very minor things that couldn't have been anticipated will have influence. Can I just ask all those people, I know there's a lot of IT people here, how many people here have actually physically seen core memory? Have some
Magnetic cores.
Huh? Yeah, I mean magnetic cores with wires through them. It's, I think, helpful to be back there and punch cards and everything else in that era to get some idea. We have no idea where we've gone. James was waving around his iPad before. I mean, it's just magic. I mean, it is magic, but if you're actually an old computer guy from the very beginning days, it is amazing that any of this stuff works. It is almost unbelievable that any of it works. Power of the...
Tony, you're saying, of course, that these problems are so complex, the only way to know how they'll come out, your rubber lamp, is by running them, correct?
Yep.
But you have to agree that every 18 months we can run them twice as fast.
Yeah, well, we can run them, but we can't run the ocean twice as fast yet.
No, but if we can run our cellular automata or our complex system twice as fast, and then next 18 months we can run it twice as fast again, Moore's law just keeps us getting faster and faster and faster. At some point, the complexity of the real world problem is less than the complexity of your cellular automata or whatever the system is.
There are just too many orders of magnitude to go. I reckon there are about 60 orders of magnitude between cellular automata and basic physics. "60 orders of magnitude, I'm not sure Moore's law is going to get across without hitting its own physical limits."
It'd be very hard to find hardware to run it on.
Yeah.
Because it's
We're talking about processes running at a level so far below basic physics it doesn't matter.
So you have a model? I mean, to
No.
get to that figure, you must have some model to calculate that figure. Can you talk a little bit about that? That's interesting.
Look, it's the gut feel that you need about 10 orders of magnitude for something interesting to happen. And I reckon there's about, from the limit of what we can do to cellular automata to getting things as miraculous as electrons and protons, there's got to be about 6 levels of emergence. So I'm just saying 6 times, 10 orders of magnitude. You can't. These cellular automata are not, despite Wolfram's fantasies, they're not going to produce electrons and protons. They're not going to produce the predecessors of electrons and protons. They're going to be several layers. The emergence is going to have to run several layers. Such as emergence of life, atoms to molecules to cells to humans to society. Society becomes interesting again. We're at nearly 10 billion people. We're getting to an interesting number where things get interesting. 10 billion neurons, 10 billion stars in a galaxy, 10 billion galaxies. All this number keeps coming up. There's 10 orders of magnitude to get interesting structure. And I think I might be wrong. It might be 5, but it's still. We can only run stuff that runs on atoms. We can only work with photons, electrons, solid state. We can't work below that.
So you think it's not? I'm puzzled. Like in an enneon, the number of electrons in an enneon is roughly 10 to the 11. The number of brain cells in a brain is 10 to the 11. The number of stars in a galaxy is about 10 to the 11.
That order.
Coincidence, or do you think this?
I think that's the number for serious emergence, or for things to happen that you couldn't possibly, they happen at another level of organisation that just isn't there. If you look at the elements and then you look at the total, you need that kind of number. Solid state physics is the same. So a lot of the answers that come out of solid state physics, if you keep chopping them apart, the results don't pan out. You've got to have a bulk of material for most of the measurements that you take. Things don't have melting points. An atom doesn't have a melting point. You've got to have a few million atoms to have a melting point.
Is this like you mentioned the anthropic principle when we were talking.
Yeah.
Is this like an anthropic principle argument that you need so many possible cases in the search space before you get the interesting one?
Yeah, the universe had to be big enough and old enough for us. And you sit down and try. Those who are in computers, sit down and try and specify how you would build something like us through a natural process, starting from any point you want to start. You'll go crazy trying to design it. Anyway, I wasn't trying to take it over. I was just having a bit of fun running some videos in the background. I see we've got rid of everybody. Were there any other presentations?
There's all these people talking about technology and how robots are going to take over the world or they're not going to take over the world and all that. Has anyone really considered the possibility of maybe stalling our own evolution, to stall our own technological progress to work back on a basic level where the average person can still, as far as I can see, pretty much when people are occupied, they're happy. Well, not happy, but they don't know the difference. So, you might be sad, but it's better than being bored.
Is it about keeping people happy?
Maybe a small society structure, and then have that network together in such a way that maybe even replicates sort of a neural network, and then start feeding it through that.
The book I mentioned before, Kevin Kelly, that What Technology Wants, he does a quite extended coverage of the Amish and their methods of adopting technology, and they tend to adopt it 100 years behind the rest of us, and very selectively within that, but they don't not adopt it. So yeah, so there are some models out there. They're probably the strongest group that that maintain their community while maintaining a process for looking at technology.
The Unabomber, the Amish?
Yeah, he was mentioned as well. Yeah.
I think the strongest argument against that is that some other group of people in, let's say, Lithuania won't slow down and they'll become more powerful and they will take over.
That goes
So, unless you can enforce a totalitarian regime around the world where everyone's slowed down, then the group of people who don't do it will go
to make them. I don't think we have to force people to slow down. I think people would be quite generally, if they were content and occupied. I know when I'm busy doing things, I don't worry about, you know, the big projects that I have going on in my head when I'm, you know, when I've got a job that I'm happy with. I'd much rather just be doing that instead. So I think if people are generally content and occupied, then they are as close to happiness as we can get. So why wouldn't you take that over, you know, an option of going really far, but then not knowing what to achieve, what you've discovered?
But there will always be some.
Yeah, I just think there's a very strong. Like, I think one thing we've seen from humans is that we are at times very competitive on whatever level, and if the idea of slowing down, or the idea of not slowing down, offers some advantage, be it corporate, political, social, whatever, I think there's always going to be either people or groups or organizations that are going to take that, even if it's just an individual that pushes that organization to gain that advantage. And then it is a bit like an arms race. You have one organization that's gaining those benefits, and it's going to be difficult to convince others to not.
Yeah.
And there are powerful forces. You know, look at academia. It's all about progress. You know, how much you discover. That's the thing. The military. You know, the American military is spending humongous amounts of money on, you know, robotics technologies because they can, you know, they hope to be able to wage wars without American casualties. You know, in business, you know, if you've got an edge in finance, or, you know, you can do more fancy algorithms. You know, Intel versus AMD. There's these huge competitive forces propelling this forward at a tremendous rate. You know, maybe most people would be happy with the status quo, but even so, you know, the prospect, you know, people get, you know, research for cures for illnesses and so on. People generally support that, so it's going to be very hard to stop. Sorry?
That's without an interest in science and engineering. What if you're someone who's happy making things or discovering new things? Are you going to ban those people from doing what they like?
Well, no, but I think maybe we could still operate on a small, like we could have people operating on a small scale and still be able to achieve those things, just maybe not as quickly.
Only by blocking access to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I suppose.
It sounds authoritarian.
Yeah.
Well, you've got these governments around the world trying to stop things like the internet, and they find they just can't.
Yeah.
Korea.
Yeah.
Afghanistan.
There's a phenomenon
That's the price.
called forced artificial scarcity, and we can see it currently with copyright. So basically, in principle, books, movies, video games, and music are free. They cost nothing. I can get everything. If the RIAA didn't threaten to cut my balls off, I could get the entire discography of the history of human music. So I think and slowly things have become more digital. So we might get a situation where technically it's free to have clothes, but everyone wants a Nike clothes, so they'll pay $50. And then they need a job. So they'll do pointless busy or enforced copyright.
Yeah, I suppose there's, in my head recently I've been thinking a bit about the way that human motivation has been working, and the fact that money, well, it may seem kind of stupid, but it's recently occurred to me that money actually is the root of all evil. It's like people motivated by money don't necessarily do as good work. People who would do good work, like anyone who's done anything truly good would probably do it for free. So
Guaranteed minimum income.
it's just like, I don't know, if our motivation is money, then there should be some equilibrium system where we can have not the issue of money and do what we like and still be able to make progress as a race. I don't know where it lies, but I'm sure it's somewhere.
There's a book by Bill McKibben called Enough. It's probably right to read. It makes exactly the argument you're making, I think. Just saying, everybody chill out. We're doing okay now. Don't rush into the future too quickly. But I think we're doing okay in the developed world. We're fairly comfortable. But the people in the rest of the world, the third of the world that goes to bed hungry every night, they could really benefit from some accelerated technology at this point.
And this is something where I disagree with the whole idea of the humans being used to a linear and not being able to use the exponential. It's just not going fast enough. It's not been going fast enough for a long time. I find it really frustrating that things are changing so slowly. And look, literature, reading and writing, isn't in the whole human race yet. Like, the biggest improvement to human software in history is literacy and numeracy. Like, it's a big upgrade in the way we use our brains and what we can do in the world, and most humans still don't have access to it. So it's one of those things that I think if we educate the world, like you guys are suggesting the state might be able to do, and the internet ultimately, with mobile phones getting to the third world now, we're going to see an increase in intelligence simply by the fact that people are educated, because an educated human is hugely different from an uneducated human. Just the difference in what they can do is enormous. And so if you can then allow those humans to get access to all of human knowledge from the internet, any skill you want to learn, you can go and look it up. That raises the bar again for what humans can do. If we were able to increase even 30 IQ points, whether that's through better nutrition or education, when education is very primitive at the moment, right? It's only recently been a subject of scientific research. It'll make it, again, I think it made a big difference to the decisions we make, to the wisdom we're able to put into what we do in the world. New Scientists had a study recently. They said there's 20 IQ points difference between the scores of people today and the scores of people in the 1940s.
The Flynn effect.
Yeah, the Flynn effect. And they can't really account for it. They don't want to believe it, but it looks pretty solid. They don't know whether it's nutrition, education, a combination of things, and they're having trouble believing it because 20 IQ points is the difference between the average person and someone who's only barely intelligent enough to be culpable legally. So it's an important difference. So and it's one of those things. I think human intelligence will go up before computer intelligence becomes.
I understand that human intelligence has already gone up just by sheer fact that we have Google out there figures. If I don't have Google out there, I reckon I'm a little bit slow.
Yeah, but you can develop a model of the internet in your head and you know what you can search for and what's likely to be there before you've even got to a computer.
I understand some people think that the Flynn effect is running out in Scandinavian countries where they have pretty much universal decent nutrition and education. So that might be the best you can get with giving people good education and good nutrition. So
we haven't got to the bottom of educational training yet.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's still very crude.
There's still, I think the Flynn effect that's been shown has not been uniform across all the dimensions of IQ. It's been more pronounced in terms of things like, vocabulary, knowledge, the things that can be increased by education, but the sort of G effect, the G factor has been less effective than there's other aspects of IQ. But I think it does seem to be running out of gas. SAT scores haven't been going up and so forth.
Sure, but what if you could make them go up? This is the thing. I don't think you need a giant. I mean, we're talking about with the Avatar X, right? Talking exponentially faster.
Yeah,
most of the AI people are talking about billions of times faster at least. You don't need that much intelligence increase to have a big change in the world for the better.
Yeah, I've seen that myself because looking at my daughter, her IQ went up very considerably from the age of 6 to the age of 20, and I think she had a really fantastic education where she was pushed, gentle pressure the whole time and exposure to lots of stuff. So yeah, I think there is some truth in that. So probably you could get an extra 10 or 15 points.
Well, not only that, but imagine if all these people who are peasants at the moment in the third world and people doing drudge work everywhere else, if they're all educated to be able to use their brains and contribute to solving the world's problems, I think again, and if they're more intelligent, it makes a difference. And it's one of those things that's going to gain momentum to make a change. There's a story today about the Android phones in Africa. There's an $80 phone which is also available in Australia for close to $80 to $100. I think it's, how do you pronounce it?
Huawei.
Huawei. It's an Android phone connected to the world by the phone network, by to the internet. And it's a pocket computer that they're now using to teach kids in the third world. These things are getting cheaper and cheaper, and it makes a difference. It changes the world. And I don't think we've anticipated that because we're focusing so much on the artificial intelligence that we're not looking at what we can do.
Well, you know, if you were to say 15 IQ points, you know, that's sort of, you know, 8 months of Moore's Law or something. You know, so the computers are going like this, and you know, we're getting sort of linear increases. So they're going to totally overwhelm us. You know, and it might take an extra 6 months or something, but it'll still happen. Because our intelligence is not increasing exponentially. You know, even if you take, say, you know, someone living in a nutritionally deprived, say, Stone Age environment, going to the best possible education, you might get 50 points.
And you think 50 points is
Oh, it's very worthwhile, yes. But it's not, but that's it.
But then there's things like memory. Like, there's ways of increasing intelligence. If your working memory is greater than most people's, is like having a photographic memory, an eidetic memory, it makes a difference to the way you do everything. If you apply that in extra intelligence to everything you do in your life, then the algorithms for how you look after yourself, how you deal with other people, how you believe politicians or not, how easily you're deceived, what you can remember from the lessons you learn,
Yeah,
it's all different.
You know, if everyone's got an IQ of 120, you have a completely different society than if everyone has an IQ
Well,
of 70.
that's sort of what I'm trying to say, and I think it's achievable.
And that's worth doing. I just suggest that the computer, you know, that's still 2 years of Moore's Law.
Well, I think that's going to happen before we solve the hard problem of self-aware computers.
I think we're going to rely more and more on our digital assistants. I mean, these sorts of smart devices have been uptaken pretty quickly. They're going to get smarter and smarter. I believe that they're also going to become more intimate in the way that we interact with them. So, I mean, they start off as digital assistants, then it'll be something like a digital twin. We keep them around all the time. They're whispering in our ear, informing us of some of the real deep, buried knowledge that we need to do, that we need to understand in order to make the decision which fits in our moral framework. So, okay, we go to a supermarket. We see a can of baked beans that was made by third world people getting ripped off. We see a can of tuna brought to you by people who don't care about dolphins, who are destroying the seas. And then your digital assistant will help push you in the right direction, will take you to the right can of beans or tuna that fits with your moral framework. If you care enough about the rest of the world, then you'll pick the little bit more expensive tuna, knowing that you're doing something for the rest of society.
Or it could remind you, you know, you've got to watch what you say to this guy because he's a backstabber or something like that.
Yes, okay, so there's all sorts of reasons why you could use this deep data mining sort of application that's whispering in your ear, and it'll become more like a symbiont. This thing then will be sort of maybe even slightly conscious or slightly aware, because having that extra level of awareness and acuteness of the world around itself would add to its viability as to providing you the right advice of which way to go. And so I can see that, you know, there's certain stages that probably go through in the way that we sort of interface with technology, and the technology will probably grow with us and then above us. I mean, we evolved our architecture, and it's evolved in such a way that it is really verbose and complex and spaghetti code oriented in the way that it's all fit together. Whatever works, incremental sort of changes in evolution has got us to where we are. There were no massive massive changes in the way that we sort of evolved. We didn't suddenly grow long fingers, or we didn't suddenly grow a frontal lobe large enough to see the world that we do now.
But we did suddenly get agriculture and civilization in the last 1,000 years.
And we can make sudden advances in technology. And the difference between the way that we can evolve and the way technology can evolve is technology can actually map the search space of what's possible, like we can with our intellect, but it can change itself. We can't really change our own programming. We're pretty much stuck in a rut. We can change the way we learn. We can maybe eat better food, and that will augment what we, how we maybe grow up, and maybe we'll get slightly more efficient brains. But we can't fundamentally change our architecture. I think well, maybe in the long run we can, but now, I mean, it would be much easier to change a simpler model that an AI or an advanced computer would be built on than trying to stuff around with the spaghetti code that we've ended up with through blind evolution. So there seems to be a lot more headroom in developing things like these to be extremely advanced. But we may be able to, after these things are developed so that really advanced, they may be able to be smart enough to learn how to uplift us in a certain way. Who knows? That's speculation, but yeah.
So 10 years of Moore's law takes you from an IQ of 10 to an IQ of 1,000. So that's the kind of scale, and that's just one 10-year period.
Sure, but we might not generate the software intelligences because we don't need them. I mean, as James pointing out, it's possible to do an awful lot of things without self-awareness. Is it necessary at all for anything we want these things to do? Like, what's it good for?
Someone will find it useful.
What's it good for?
Well, to be self-aware, to operate in a complex world, you have to have a model of yourself as part of your model of the world, because you have to model what you do and the effects of what you do on the world and feedback loops. So some kind of self-awareness in that sense is really required to be, I think, an effective operator in the world.
I think also we're basing our arguments on intuitive understandings of how much self-awareness can help. I mean, we've got a particular configuration of self-awareness and a configuration of general intelligence. We're not completely general. I mean, there are classes of problems like walking and using our arms to pick stuff up and catching balls, which are extremely harder to do in computation as far as we understand than just pure mathematics. Mathematics is easy for computers. It's just number crunching, but we're no good at it. We take a real complex, weird way of, adding something. But we can do really complex things. Now, it's not surprising because ever since our first ancestors who, walked on or flipped around in the ocean were moving about the environment, trying to gather food, trying to understand the world through a tactile sense of it and everything. We've only really been using our frontal lobes to the degree we are now, maybe for a couple of million years, not even that. Oh, well, I mean, sure, but in comparison to the time we've had evolving our ability or our adeptness in operating physically in the environment with our limbs, and it's quite long compared to how long we've been using our frontal lobe and sort of rationalising and philosophising about the world.
The fact that we have evolved self-awareness does strongly suggest that it's a useful thing.
It could be a byproduct. I mean, evolution's not that sharp a tool for these things. It could easily be a byproduct. I mean, we're social. I mean, the theory is that self-awareness comes from social animals, that we have models of others who have models of us, and the infinite regression of models is what we have as self-awareness. Intelligences we build don't have to be social. That's an accident of evolution, that we're social. I'm not sure it's
going to have to cooperate with other computers or other humans. It's going to have to be individuals. It'll have those same problems.
Well, I mean, a lot of things are accidents of evolution, but the things which were left in the environment were the things which succeeded. And so our ability to socialise and our ability to sort of conceptualise and model the world in an articulate way so as to be able to change it and use the world around us as our tool has been an extremely useful accident of evolution. So, maybe is there? I'd be interested to know. Do you think there are any comparative accidents of evolution? to our ability, to evolving the ability to conceptualize, model the world, and use our environment as a manipulating tool, or to fashion the environment into tools, offload our sort of cognition onto the environment.
But do you need an internal narrative to do that? Is intelligence, does it need the self-awareness?
I'm not sure that it does.
Yeah, that's kind of...
I think it does. I mean, for certain kinds of problems, no. But if you're going to act in the world, you need to take into account the effect of your acts in the world, and therefore you need to know that you are,
but you need to be individuals. You need to have separate individuals. Why wouldn't they all just network as one organisation?
That's the funny thing. The two network computers are actually one computer.
Yeah.
3 network computers are one computer.
So why wouldn't they all just be one individual? Why would they be many?
Why do you assume they can be? Why do you assume that
Because that's what networking is. I mean, if you've got your ridiculously fast intelligence...
You've got 2 computers, the bandwidth within the one computer, it's the same with humans. Vast bandwidth within one brain, but far less bandwidth between. So
but
you
it's
have
going
this sort of
up
locality.
every year. It's exponentially
It's still far,
going
no, but it's still...
There's no physical limit that we know
The bandwidth
of.
within one CPU is far, far, far greater than what can go down an optical fibre.
Yeah, it's the speed of light.
No, that doesn't limit the information.
It limits the
light
speed.
That's the speed of light, but how fast is the bit rate of the speed of light? This is what Hugo was
However,
talking about earlier.
so you've got the rate, which is far lower than what's within one CPU, and you've also got the latency, which is also far greater.
But if the bit rate doubles annually, then the bit rate just goes up.
But the
What's to stop that?
processing power.
Sure. So what?
So the relative difference between remains the same.
I/O is getting kind of slower relative to CPUs than not fast.
The bit rate's doubling annually. That's what Hugo was talking about before with internet getting fast. There is no physical limit to the data bit rates that we know about.
What Tim's saying is that the speed of CPU is getting faster compared to the speed of networking. Yeah, but they're both going up.
So you're confusing the rate with the speed. So there's the size of the pipe with how fast data moves down the pipe. So
the bit rate...
You can move vast amounts of data.
It all depends on what level you look at it as to what appears as a coherent whole. Like the brain isn't one system, it is lots and lots of systems that all interact and talk to each other. There's
some of them work quite slowly.
With the 2 hemispheres talking to each other on the biggest level. So it's sort of an accident that we appear to each other as individuals. And the units of individuality.
Sure, but I mean, estimates between the bandwidth between 2 people is a few kilobits. The bandwidth within the brain is hundreds of megabytes per second.
Yeah, but if I had...
Even between the 2 halves.
If I had wireless implants in the centre of my brainstem that could transmit everything that was passing through it into your head at the speed of thought and back and forth, then we essentially become a new individual. We're not 2 distinct entities anymore. We're literally sharing everything that goes on in each of our heads.
Douglas Hofstadter in his book I'm a Strange Blue talks about that sort of thing. Yeah. The individuality is kind of an artifact in that sense. But
that's sort of my point, is that if you look at a bunch of computers talking to each other that have one input, one interface to you, they will appear not necessarily as a society, but as a unit, as an entity. Like you talk to Google. Google is one entity to me, but Google is actually hundreds of thousands of computers all talking to each other. Very good.
Yes.
Still, it's also the Turing problem. Like, how do you determine when say you're not even trying to create a new artificial general intelligence, but you're trying to upload a mind that already exists, or you're trying to copy it. How do you tell if it's just a very good simulation or if it's a genuine emulation of a person? Because the Turing test is whether or not you convince a human, right, that it's talking to the other person. But humans can be deceived. So maybe we're just going to build something that's going to be a really good, it's going to be a zombie, but it's going to be a Zimbo, a really good zombie that fools us, that hits all our buttons.
We even do that. Humans do that. You might pretend to be a nice guy in order to get someone to be your friend or give you some resources or go out with you or whatever. But you say you're simulating a nice guy, but you're not, maybe not really be that. So humans already do that, and I don't think anyone's really answered the question of what
what determines whether something is real or a simulation. You know, because you go, our brain is a simulation.
Sorry? If you can simulate it well enough, then it's real.
Well, no, because we can be fooled into thinking things are real that are actually totally false.
But what I'm questioning is the very concept of real. I mean, our brain is simulating our brain.
I understand.
So, but the other problem with having all the computers in the world in a seamless whole is someone's got to program this. You know, when you're building big computer systems, modularity is a key thing to making them work. You know, simple interfaces, you know, clear functions, etc., etc. So if you have this big amorphous blob, how are you ever going to make it work?
Obviously, the researchers want self-programming artificial intelligences, self-modifying code, and I still don't see that has to be self-aware automatically. But I'm saying with the whole idea of what you can tell, the difference between something that's pretending to levitate and something that really is a world of difference. It looks the same, but it's not the same.
Now, but does the same distinction exist, you know, with, say, intelligence? Is there a sort of real intelligence versus fake intelligence, or is there just intelligence?
I think
you know,
there are currently bots that can fool people in chat rooms. There are chat bots that will pass the Turing test for some people for some of the time, because they seem like real people. Are those self-aware bits of software? Most people don't think so. But they fool people into thinking they are.
At some level,
you've got to...
Aren't they just fake?
We've got these buttons that you can run and just a conversation.
If you're going to act in the world, you have to be self-aware to the extent that you're aware of that you exist.
How is any computer intelligence, any digitized consciousness, having to act in the world? They're in a digital realm.
No, but that's the whole point. We want them to run things. We want them to, you know, control the weather or fix global warming, or, you know, make sure everyone's got fun things to do or whatever. That's the whole point of any machine, is to do things.
But I'm just saying, how do you know you can trust it? Like, if you think you've got a system because it's good enough to fool you, but it's not actually got a self-aware narrative like we do, it's not a real person, but it's simulated one well enough to fool you. It's a very intelligent system. At some point, you're going to make assumptions about how it's going to act because you're modelling this imaginary person. But it's not actually going to act that way because it's not actually that person you're imagining.
Can I just ask, do you think it would be harder to model something that is self-aware, or harder to model something that isn't? I just want a general consensus. Do you think one's more difficult than the other? Just intuitively, you don't have to...
Do you mean computer models? You mean mental models? What do you mean?
Do you think it's harder to model something, in principle, to simulate something that is self-aware or something that's not?
I think it's easier for us as humans to imagine almost anything and everything as self-aware. That's one of those things that we anthropomorphise everything. The uncanny valley, right? If you can get things really close to being human-like in appearance, that aren't human at all. We'll anthropomorphise animals that have no human characteristics.
PCs already. You know.
Exactly. People get angry at their computers.
So we read this into...
It takes very few cues for us to have an emotional relationship with something that has no emotion.
We read this into a chatbot.
How hard do you think it'll be for us to relate to something that may or may not be conscious on the inside? Well, if we could already do that without even it being conscious, then what's the real...
But this is what I'm saying, like, at the moment, in Japan they're developing emotional robots. Well, mostly responsive robots. So they don't feel emotions, but they push the buttons in people so that people feel comfortable around them and they're happy to be looked after, or they're happy to play with them. So they've got robotic pets because they can't have real pets in the overpopulated cities. We're looking at robotic nurses to look after the elderly because they don't have enough nurses for the elderly. And so they're looking at social robots. Now, none of these robots are even vaguely near self-awareness, but they can push the buttons that let you project an imaginary personality onto them, like when you play with, you know, toys as a kid.
Exactly. Or you read a book.
Yeah.
You can read a book. I mean, that's a pretty low form of technology by today's standards, but that can push your emotional buttons. You can get a television with a recorded scene of somebody saying this, that, and the other, or even a cartoon.
Well, exactly. So what I'm saying is, it's because we're developing this stuff to push our buttons without the self-awareness. And the danger is that we won't be able to tell the difference.
Sure. And at some point, a lot of the complexity in these things may, I think, will reach the point where, if they want to, really fully duplicate human capabilities, they'll have to have all this stuff. They'll have to have emotions. They'll have to have, otherwise they just can't function. Like they found this with people. You cut off the emotional parts of the brain if they've had an epilepsy or a tumour or whatever. They cannot function. They cannot make decisions. They don't have motives. They don't know what's important. They don't know what their values are. They don't know what's how to proceed. They don't know how to make. They don't have a basis to make decisions. So sure, you can hand feed it in, but at the end of the day, they're going to have this complexity. It will emerge, and we will believe, probably rightly, I think, that they do have these attributes of consciousness, self-awareness, emotion, etc. But we'll have to see.
How will we detect if they're self-aware?
Well, they will tell us in a convincing fashion.
But they'll be able to
How do I know you're self-aware? How do I know you're self-aware? You behave in that way. You can introspect. You talk about your self-awareness, the quality of green. Desires and wishes.
We also are fairly similar to each other in terms of your physiology and what you expect to see.
Can I just say, we've got a guy who's done quite a bit of research on this, and I offered he offered to do a lightning talk, and this would be a good time to do it. It might be getting a bit late, but we can just have one more lightning talk, and he might be able to bring up some of these issues as well, and then we can continue the discussion. So Colin, and I think Colin has a particularly unique perspective on this, although I don't know a lot about it.
Okay. Before you do, can I just cut? We were talking big numbers before. While Adam was having a rant, I let a program run, and it kind of, I thought, I didn't try to stop it because I didn't want to know what the number was. When it finished up, it ran 10 to 160 generations. So many more than there are totals in the universe, it doesn't matter. And it decided the total population was not a number. There are that many there. Yet I can on this little Mac has all these in there because they're all self-similar. So it had that I can zoom in on every single cell, any arbitrary cell. You just haven't got long enough to zoom in on all of them because it's this. You've got to have some structure beyond that. If you've actually got a fully fractal system like this is, where it's completely self-similar, you can get that down. If I save this file, it's probably only going to be 10K. And that contains numbers that are vastly bigger than the number of anything in the universe. So people get confused with big numbers, get confused with exponential growth. This thing was growing exponentially for about 2 minutes and blows out of proportion. So just beware when you think you understand numbers, because you probably don't.
Okay, cool.
Listen, I'll pack this up now so it stops.